Hello and welcome. This VPAL signature event is brought to you by Harvard's Office of the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning in partnership with the Harvard Alumni Association. I'm pleased to welcome our speaker this evening, Jacqueline Lane. Without further ado, Professor Lane, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. Good evening, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here and to share some work that I've been doing in the last few years about how we're going to go beyond the algorithm to explore how AI is fundamentally rewiring both human creativity and decision making. And so I'd love to start with this question of what makes you creative? Let's think about that for a moment. Is it the ability to produce lots of ideas quickly, to write compelling copy, to generate a business plan, or maybe even design a logo? Or perhaps is it something deeper, the capacity to explore trade-offs or find blind spots, maybe question your own strategy and see patterns that other people might miss? And so what we're going to do today is what I'm going to argue is that today AI is forcing us to fundamentally rethink this question of what makes you creative. And this answer has profound implications for how we work, how we innovate, and how we build companies. And so let me show you a framework for thinking about this. And we can think about creativity along two different dimensions. On the horizontal axis, we have our creative output. This is volume and speed. And then on the vertical axis, you might think of it as creative capacity. What is our cognitive depth and how deeply and strategically can we think? And so traditionally, if you think about creative output, routine creative work has lived along this x-axis, the production side of these kinds of creative tasks that are high volume but relatively low cognitive depth. So think of marketing copy drafts, business plan templates, logo variants. They're high volume, repeatable work that requires speed and output. But let's say to come up with this draft, it's less deep judgment. And so these are the kinds of tasks that generative AI is helping us automate today. Need a marketing copy? Here's 5 versions in 30 seconds. Generate a logo for a new snack food company. Here are 20 alternatives. This is the story that we are hearing today. AI is automating this routine stuff and freeing humans up for strategy. And so essentially, there is, however, but what about this kind of strategic thinking that requires this kind of cognitive depth? This deep thinking involves exploring trade-offs, finding blind spots in our thinking, even questioning our strategy. But the constraint that we've typically faced along this dimension of creative capacity is that the work has been slow, and we couldn't explore trade-offs for 100 options, or we couldn't pressure test our strategy in 50 different ways. This kind of deep thinking didn't necessarily scale. I think perhaps less obvious is how AI can potentially amplify our creative capacity. And so, for example, if you're exploring trade-offs, can AI help you analyze 100 different options or look for blind spots? Can AI help to surface patterns that we couldn't necessarily process alone? And so, what we'll explore today together is how we can use AI to both automate and amplify our creativity effectively, and then also explore the opportunities and the limits of combining this AI amplification for these kind of deep strategy kinds of questions and this automation together to get the most creative output and capacity. And so, what I'm really excited to share with you all is 3 different studies that we've been doing at the Lab for Innovation Science at Harvard on this topic. And so, the first one is the creativity test. Can AI actually automate creative output and match human creativity? Spoiler alert, the answer is yes, but there is also this surprising pattern in what AI can create versus what humans can create. The second study is what we call the judgment test. And so if we say, okay, AI can generate ideas, but the question is, can it amplify our human judgment when we're evaluating hundreds or thousands of ideas? The answer here is sometimes, as AI can be highly persuasive, and this can actually hurt our human judgment. And then the third is a real world example called the startup test. And this is where the theory that we've built in those first two studies really meets reality. And what I'm going to share with you is some work that I've been doing with three founders who have built a company using both automation for routine tasks and AI amplification for strategic thinking. But now they're at this point when they're trying to scale to move from a startup to a bigger company, and they're hitting these trade-offs. And so the struggle that they're experiencing right now really reveals this fundamental tension between automation and amplification that we will take a look at together. So let's look at this the first study on the creativity test. And here we went out to ask this question of, can AI automate creative output and match the creativity of the human crowd? And you might be wondering, why the human crowd? Well, we wanted to look at the creativity of the human crowd because it captures these diverse and unique perspectives of humans that come from all over the world. And so, in order to actually do this, we launched a crowdsourcing challenge on generating new business ideas for the circular economy. And we partnered with a gig work platform called Freelancer to actually solicit these ideas from the human crowd. And so once we set out to crowdsource these ideas, these business ideas on the circular economy, which is an economic system that emphasizes continual reuse and regeneration of resources in an environmentally sustainable way, we then went out and crowdsourced ideas from the human crowd via the Freelancer platform. And then we also prompt engineered with GPT-4 or ChatGPT, let's say in the comfort of our own homes. And after generating all of these different ideas in response to solving these issues or concerns with the circular economy, we then went to human experts and asked them to rate the creativity of these ideas that came back from the human crowd and AI. And in fact, in terms of our creativity, what we were really, really astonished to find is that there was really no difference in the creativity of the outputs as assessed by these human experts. However, creativity is often a combination of different dimensions, and you might think of creativity as being, ideas that are both innovative or original and also valuable in the sense that, can you actually create a financial impact and an environmental impact with these ideas? And so we dug into these two dimensions a little further, and here's where we found a difference. What you're looking at here is a plot of the value and the novelty of these ideas. So those are the two dimensions of creativity. And if I were to ask you who generates more innovative ideas, do you think AI would come out on top or humans? What we found here is that the most innovative solution actually came from a human. And it came from a female entrepreneur from Nigeria whose idea was to create innovative bricks made out of foundry dust and waste plastic featuring this Lego-like interlocking design to reduce air pollution from construction. And so here was our most innovative idea that came back from our crowdsourcing challenge, and that happened to be a human-generated idea. However, when it came to looking at the most valuable ideas in terms of those ideas that were most likely to create a financial impact and an environmental impact, that idea came from AI. And this solution here aimed to convert food waste from restaurants and households into biogas for electricity and fertilizer through these bioenergy centers. And so, consistent with these anecdotes, or the most novel and the most valuable idea, we did find that the human crowd generally generated more innovative solutions, including those that were the most innovative in the distribution, whereas AI was more likely to generate the most valuable solutions. And so we do see, in some ways, this complementarity where humans are better at generating more novel ideas, whereas AI was more likely to come up with valuable ones. And then the last piece that was really that really caught our attention is that this idea that AI enables cost-effective ideation at scale. So what do I mean by that? if you set aside the cost and the time to develop these ideas, or sorry, to develop the platforms, then AI could generate all of these ideas at just a tiny fraction of the cost and time that it took us to launch the crowdsourcing challenge, to incentivize the human crowd, to await their responses, and to assess them. And so, what it suggested to us is that there is this opportunity, if we're thinking about coming up with many, many ideas, this divergent process of creating many choices or many alternatives. AI can, in many ways, help us automate this process by widening the space at which we consider. And so, and integrating AI into this creative generation process is one way that we can come up with more ideas at scale in a cost-effective manner. However, if this is true, and we're on board with this, with having AI help us with creating choices, then how might we actually use AI to help us make better choices? If we have so many ideas and ideas are abundant, then we're going to need better ways of making good choices in terms of selecting those ideas that we want to move forward with. And so this was the question, this convergent process was the question that really motivated our next study on the judgment test. And so essentially, generative AI has really helped to revolutionize this creative process by enabling the fast and economical idea generation at scale. But as we saw from the last study, if it was true that AI is enabling us to create choices more easily and quickly, then this abundance of ideas might create a new bottleneck for us, which is the fact that evaluating these ideas as humans alone might become overwhelming. And so our research team went out to try and figure out how we could amplify our human judgment when trying to evaluate many, many ideas at scale. And in order to do this, we partnered with MIT Solve, which is an entrepreneurship platform that runs innovation challenges at scale each year and receives thousands of applications from real innovators who are tackling issues in climate, health, and education. And so what they do is they offer funding and mentorship to the best global innovators who are behind these ideas. And what we did here in order to try and understand how humans could collaborate with AI when evaluating ideas is look at different ways of different types of AI assistance. And so here's just an example of how we provided AI assistance to these to help humans evaluate these solutions or these ideas that were coming on to the MIT Solve platform. And so imagine that you have this new app for tracking patient data, and you are given two types of AI generated recommendations. One of them, which is what we called a black box AI, which gave you a recommendation on what to do with this app. And in this case, it suggested failing it in the sense that it was not worthy of moving on. And then in a second scenario, it suggested the same recommendation to fail this proposal, but it also gave some explanations, such as the scalability is not addressed, the financial projections are vague, and there was insufficient impact evidence. And so essentially, we had these two different types of recommendations, and we ran an experiment or a study where we took 48 real solutions that were submitted to the MIT Solve platform and gave them to human evaluators to review these solutions. And what we did was assign these evaluators into three different conditions. Some of them worked alone, and so it was just a human process of needing to evaluate each of these solutions to decide whether or not they should move forward in the process or not. Some got AI recommendations, the black box recommendations without any sorts of narratives or explanations to justify why. And then some got these AI recommendations with these narratives or this reasoning to help them justify and understand why AI was giving it the recommendation that it did. And what we were really interested in measuring is whether they picked up these better solutions when they had the AI assistance, and whether they maintained their own judgment or just deferred to AI. And so what do we find? Well, what we found is that AI assistants really improve the quality of the selected ideas, in the sense that when humans worked with AI and had some sort of AI assistance, either the black box or the narratives, they were more likely to advance the innovative solutions. And so they did better overall. And yet there was a catch, in the sense that having these AI explanations, so having the narratives accompany the recommendations, actually diminished their ability to think independently. And people were deferring to AI even when they shouldn't have. And what this suggests is that having this more transparency, so having these justifications that accompanied the recommendations, didn't necessarily lead to better thinking, but it did lead to more deference. In the sense that when people had access to the black box AI, their judgments were improving and they became accurate and they caught more of those good ideas. But when we added the narratives and when AI explained its reasoning, people started to trust the AI too much, in the sense that these explanations might be persuasive and telling us that it felt like we were understanding it. And to just give you some ideas of why how these narratives were persuading our evaluators, we ended up interviewing some of our evaluators about their experiences. And what I've done here is just provide a couple of examples of what these evaluators said to us. And essentially, what they said is when AI provided the explanations, they definitely found, one of the screeners said it was definitely more helpful to have the full information versus just having the recommendation without the reasoning behind each of the criteria. In the sense that the full information might be persuasive. And then another evaluator said that when they did have the explanation, they preferred it because it just corroborated what their gut instinct was. And so essentially, these two quotes suggest that these AI narratives can be persuasive and that humans may be unintentionally over relying on these AI recommendations and explanations. And I think this idea of AI being persuasive, especially when we're interacting with, generative AI such as ChatGPT, goes beyond this our study. I mean, I think there are, on one hand, I think there are examples. For example, in the New York Times, about a month ago, there was an example of someone who became convinced through interactions with ChatGPT that he had invented a new mathematical framework with world-altering implications, even though he had done multiple reality checks, asking over 50 times um, whether that he was actually onto something, and ChatGPT actually validating him and assuring him that this was actually true. And so there's examples like this that exist out in the real world. And then more generally, there is this broader science of persuasion, in the sense that there's this art of persuasion. And if we are not exercising our human judgment, then perhaps AI could be persuading us and leading us astray sometimes. Um, and so, what does this mean for how we're using AI for this creative process? Well, we saw previously that when it comes to creating choices, integrating AI into our creative process can be a way for us to generate ideas at scale and also efficiently. But when it comes to making choices and deciding which ideas we want to move forward with, AI can amplify this creative capacity of figuring out the trade-offs between the different ideas in helping us exercise our human judgment when it informs but does not replace our human decisions. And in the case of our study, we did see that these narrative explanations are helpful when we are in this kind of when we are creating these choices, but they can actually backfire when we are trying to make choices because we may use them as these kinds of persuasive shortcuts as opposed to exercising our independent thinking. And in that regard, what is interesting here is that having some sort of recommendation, but withholding the full explanation, can actually help us think more deeply before exercising a decision. And so where we are is that we've looked at two different studies of how AI can help us with both creating and automating our creative output, and then also how we can use AI perhaps strategically to amplify our human judgment. The next study that I'd like to share is this real world kind of startup test. And so what we've seen is that AI can match human creative output, and we've seen it, and it can potentially even amplify our human judgment. But the question is, what happens when you actually try to build a company on this? And so what I'd love to share with you next is a case that I've been working on with a company called Focus Fuel, where three founders have done exactly this, using AI to build a company. And so here's the Focus Fuel success story. This is a company that has three founders, Daniel, John, and Brandon, no investors, no employees. It's just them and ChatGPT. And what they've done here is launch a caffeine gummy startup, and they are able to compete in a crowded market against established brands. In their first year alone, they have generated 1.5 million in revenue, both through direct to consumer and on Amazon. And in their second year, they are exploring and trying to scale into mass retail. They've got relationships with the Costco business centers, and they're currently negotiating contracts to enter this mass retail market. And so, what I'd love to share with you is this notion that when it was time for them to go from a startup to a scalable business, they hit these crossroads. And the reason why I think reveals something fundamental about how AI can amplify and automate creative work. And so, Focus Fuel is a really fun company. So, I'm just going to share this short video about the brand that they've built. And so essentially what you see is that they've got vibrant branding, they've got social media presence, and they've got an e-commerce site, an Amazon storefront, and everything really that this modern direct-to-consumer brand needs. And this was essentially all AI enabled. Let's dig into this a little bit and try and understand how they actually used AI in these two different ways. On the left-hand side, they did automation. And so essentially, this is the creative output test. They did marketing copies, website development, legal contract review, financial modeling, and even naming the company. This is where they were able to automate some of this creative work, and they were able to save about $300,000 through not hiring additional staff. This is also the story that we seem to know about AI. It's replacing junior work, perhaps even freeing up humans for strategy. But on the right-hand side, this is how they were able to use AI for amplification. In terms of manufacturing science, for example, none of these founders, they come from a brand marketing background, and they didn't have any sort of chemistry degrees, but AI helped them understand formulation, supply chain strategy, retail negotiations, regulatory compliance. These are all things where AI was able to help them bridge expertise gaps in the way that they were able to think at a level that normally requires years of experience or perhaps years of experience and expertise. And it is really this combination of automation for volume and application for cognitive depth that has really made these three founders really feel like they are 10. And what working with Focus Fuel has enabled me to learn is that AI doesn't necessarily just democratize expertise, but rather it is accelerating it. What Focus Fuel has been able to do in going from 0 to 1.5 million in these last 18 months is really compress 5 to 10 years of learning into 18 months through this kind of AI accelerated learning curve. These three founders or co-founders that have started Focus Fuel have operated across domains that usually requires these specialized teams. And in essence, ChatGPT has become their fourth, fifth, sixth, and co-founder that is operating in these separate sorts of business units. But I did mention that they're at these crossroads at the moment. And the question is, what got them to this 1.5 million? These three people with ChatGPT, the minimum capital, the fast iteration, may not actually be aligned with what they need to grow this company. And here they're at this crossroads where they're constantly thinking that they want to hire more headcount, or they want to add people to their payroll, and they need this deep operational expertise in order to execute across these multiple retail channels. And so what they've been able to do is succeed by combining automation, by staying lean with amplification, which is learning fast. But the question here is, does this model have limits? Automation can scale infinitely, but amplification seems to be bound by humans. You can only accelerate the learning of the people you have. And three people with AI can think like 10, but can they actually execute like 10? And the question that we're exploring together is, at what point will this amplified capacity potentially hit some sort of ceiling? Or is there a ceiling of human bandwidth? And so to put everything together, AI has really enabled us to move up to the right through automation and amplification together. However, there is this frontier and there is a boundary where the amplification also meets these human limits. We don't know exactly where it is, but Focus Fuel and these other sorts of AI startups, or these creative startups, are on this frontier and trying to really discover where that boundary is. And I think the question for all of us is, what do we want the future to look like? Will it be these radically efficient small teams, new organizational forms, or a return to more traditional structure? And so perhaps three key insights to leave you with. First, AI can really automate creative output, but in the sense that you can generate ideas in scale, you can automate execution work, and we can replace some functions with new tools. But this automation alone isn't a competitive advantage. The second is that AI can really amplify our creative capacity in the sense that it can extend our expertise into new domains. It can help us find blind spots and explore trade-offs. However, the final judgment must stay human, and we can't let those narratives or those confident-sounding narratives really replace our critical thinking. And then the third point is that automation can scale infinitely, but amplification scales with humans. So that's all I had. But thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jackie. The first question in our Q&A box is, was the prompt language the exact same for humans and AI? Did you test different phrasing at all? I believe this was to the first couple of points you've made.
Thanks for that question. We did. So we tried to keep everything as similar as possible. And so what we did in that study was essentially give the same instructions, the same crowdsourcing challenge that we launched to the human crowd, to AI as well. And so we did use the same prompt. Maybe just to build on that, we use the same original prompt in sorts of the kinds of ideas that we were interested in generating, and the kinds of ideas in terms of the circular economy. But we did do some prompt engineering to see if we could increase the creativity of the ideas that AI was generating. And if there's interest, I can go into that in more detail. as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question reads, is AI capable of out of the box thinking? Could it ever come up with inventions driven by creative analysis? Examples, invention of Velcro, or by accident, like post-it notes or Teflon.
Yeah, I think that's a great question and something that we're all curious about. I mean, these models keep on getting better. And I think if you view if you view creativity as a combination of different ideas, then there is this possibility that AI might see some leaps or some combinations or some creative sparks through being able to do multiple combinations in the ways that humans might not be able to do on our own. Um, I think actually the where we are in terms of this frontier is the ability of humans to actually use these recombinations or these sparks that AI comes up with, and then be able to also exercise our own human creativity and our judgment to come up with these really novel sorts of ideas. I think the frontier is constantly moving on that one.
Another question reads, what advice do you give faculty who want to bury their heads in the sand about generative AI? In particular, advice for rethinking their teaching and assessments in the age of Gen AI. Should they ban laptops, return to blue books, or is your advice something else?
Yeah, I think this is something that we are real that we all have this question about. I can say that what I see in the classroom is um, generative AI is there, and I think there's two ways that we can think about it. Is ChatGPT a tool that we use to get all the answers for us? Or is it something that we can use like a tutor that can help us deepen our thinking and come up with an understanding of how we get from point A to point C? Um, I think the way that these interfaces are designed is that they're more designed for using them as tools where we get the answers. However, I do think that if we thought about them as tutors or co-pilots or conversation partners, it can actually help us deepen our thinking. So that I don't see it as being negative in the classroom, but I do think that it can give students personalized learning. At the end of the day, what is really important is the ability to reason and to understand. And I think what one thing that our study showed is that when we make things too easy, when we gave both the recommendations of whether or not of what AI thought and the explanations, that was just too easy, and people as a result fell asleep, and we're no longer using their cognitive judgment. And so I think it's important to think about how we can design, or maybe perhaps even withhold some of the power of these AI tools so that we can ensure that people are still learning and understanding and comprehending and thinking strategically and deeply.
We have a question here related to some of your earlier points in the presentation, which highlighted the extreme values in each of the two dimensions. Someone asks, is that conclusion based on the outliers of just one experiment?
Yeah, so essentially what we did was we ended up having roughly 150 ideas from the human crowd and 150 ideas from AI. And we compared the average creativity, the average in terms of their innovativeness, and the average in terms of their value. And then we also compared the extreme. And so we compared the likelihood of getting a top rating on either the innovativeness or the value dimension. And here's where we saw that there was a difference between the humans and the AI in terms of the innovativeness. And so it is based on the extreme kind of outliers. And maybe just like one more point, I think like when we do come from, when we do think about innovation, and we're thinking about breakthroughs, we do care about the most outlier kinds of ideas out there. And so at the time when we ran the study, humans did have the edge there. And I think there's some research that points to the fact that humans can, humans together collectively can be more diverse than the AI's outputs. And so I think that is in line with being able to see these extreme value points.
Someone asks, what about improving ideas? Could the distinct advantages of humans and AI synergize to lead to better ultimate products? Have you considered evaluating iteration?
I mentioned earlier that we tried different ways of prompt engineering when we ran that first study on which the study is called the crowdless future with a question mark. And one of the ways in which we prompt engineered with ChatGPT was essentially, you know, we inserted an additional prompt after it generated its initial idea to say, please revise and differentiate this from all the ideas that had come from before it. And so it was through this kind of iteration, and what we saw is this human collaboration with AI here that led to better ideas that were able to match, let's say, the creativity of the human crowds. I would say that an implication of that study that is not to really say that one is better than the other. If you're looking to generate many, many ideas at scale, then AI can really help you do that. However, if you're looking for the most innovative output out there, I think it seems to be that iterating is or sequencing between humans and AI may be a plausible way to go, in the sense that we can come up with the initial innovative ideas, and then we can have AI help refine and make them better, increase their value. And you can think of it as a loop, human in the loop and AI in the loop.
Thank you. One question reads, in your experiments slash studies, did you notice any relevant statistical anomalies in the AI amplification and or depth of solutions slash answers provided that was created on the technique, expertise, or frame of the participants?
Yeah, so let me try and answer that in two different ways. In the first way, I think, and I alluded to this a little bit already, but what we did was we tried to compare, what we did was compare, let's say, the similarity of the ideas that came out. And I think one thing that was apparent is that if you're drawing upon, the human crowd who comes with very different experiences, backgrounds, expertise, and knowledge, you're going to get more diverse ideas. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're all better ideas, but they are essentially more diverse ones than we saw with AI. The AI ideas, which tend to have the skinnier distribution in terms of their diversity, because we were working with one model. I think another way to answer this question is from the expertise angle. And I think there's this question of what can AI do in terms of enabling and amplifying our expertise. I think in the second study where we were looking at evaluating with AI, one thing that we did see was that those who had less domain expertise, who had less knowledge about global health, which was the context of the challenge, and were less familiar with the organization, they actually did better. They were the ones who actually got the real boost from AI. And so in terms of expertise, the novices were the ones who benefited more. I think in terms of the work that I've been doing with Focus Fuel, the startup, here I think AI has really enabled them to learn much faster. So it's essentially compressing the learning curve for them, and it's allowed them to gain expertise in these areas that they don't actually have any training or background or prior work experience in. And so there is this kind of compression of expertise effect that is going on here. I think in both those studies.
This question is coming from Jennifer S. Lerner. Very interesting research. Were humans instructed to first think of ideas themselves, idea independence, before sharing views with others, i.e., the ideal process for maximizing wisdom of the crowd? Or did they generate ideas together?
Oh, that would be so great in order to do that. We actually had our humans generate the ideas independently. And and so what we were thinking about doing and what we did was to try and, let's say, maximize diversity and independent judgment. And so we had each of our humans actually come up with ideas on their own. However, that being said, I think it would be very interesting to actually be able to compare two humans or a team of humans interacting with each other. In many ways, I often think about that second study that we have with having AI assistants as humans interacting with AI. And so I think a natural comparison is to have humans interact with each other and see what kinds of ideas you can co-create together as opposed to humans interacting with AI. And I think that would be a natural extension of taking this work into more of a team setting. But here we were really interested in this kind of wisdom of the crowd. What if we threw out this idea of coming up with good ideas in the circular economy into the world? What kinds of ideas would we come back from different parts of the world?
Awesome. This is more of a general question. How do we ensure diverse values and perspectives are included in AI systems?
That's another really, really great question. Yes, because I think there have been studies that have shown that um, it- sometimes diverse viewpoints may not always be represented. And I think you can think of diversity in a number of different ways. I think like the most straightforward way in the research that I have done is really thinking about diversity in terms of how similar are the creative ideas that come back and that are generated by AI. And we do see that there is a shrinkage in terms of that diversity. Um, and so I think the way that we can ensure this is actually through many of the questions that have been highlighted or have been raised. And I think it's this interaction between humans and AI in the sense that uh, for us to retain that human judgment, the creative thinking, and the judgment that is needed to really assess and also iterate with AI. And I think that is how we can preserve that. So AI is really amplifying us and taking us to new levels as opposed to replacing our roles in this process. Because creativity really has also benefited not just from having the best idea, but also from diversity.
And piggybacking off of that, this question asks best practices for using AI for creativity and avoiding pitfalls like over reliance.
I've thought about this, and I think I would say that in that second study, and I'm happy to share more about exactly what we did. But essentially going into it, I actually thought that having, explanations or narratives accompany the recommendations that AI was providing was going to be a helpful thing. It'll just help us understand or reason or rationalize what AI is saying. What I learned and what was surprising is that sometimes withholding the most powerful AI or the most like these narratives or these explanations could actually help us use our judgment because it makes us think. And it allows us to stop and think and disagree potentially with what AI is recommending to us in a way that when AI makes things so easy for us by having the rationale and the reasoning there already, it just makes us want to defer to it or overly rely on it. And I think it goes back more broadly to this question of how we design these interfaces. AI is so spontaneous and it's so quick and it's so easy to interact with ChatGPT and get responses from it. But what if we tried to slow it down? And it didn't give us 100% of everything that we were looking for. It may be frustrating, but it may actually enable us to think deeper and reduce or mitigate that risk of over reliance.
And this question is from Jean Luck Jackson. It says, "Thanks for sharing, Jackie. Based on the work you've done so far, what questions are you interested in researching next?"
So this is fun. I think like one thing that I'm really curious about is probably where we ended with Focus Fuel. And so I've been working with them for almost a year now, and pretty much watched this company go from scratch to now being on Amazon and being um, influence going from influencer led to being on Amazon and now going into mass retail. And I think that an interesting question is how do we scale these really small kind of lean AI startups in the sense that in working with them, I get, it's clear that they really want to hire and they really want to add headcount and really add expertise um, because because it seems natural and they seem like they need it. And I think the next phase is really trying to figure out, where should they be adding headcount, or are there ways that they can scale that we just haven't seen. And I'm very curious about the new kinds of organizational structures and the forms that will emerge um, that based on these kinds of companies that are staying super lean, at least in the initial stages. And then I think more broadly, I think these two studies have really kind of illuminated a whole bunch of questions of, how can we integrate AI into our workflows, within our workflows effectively. And, there's questions about how do you sequence or iterate with AI? When should we, offload to AI versus, do the work ourselves, or what kinds of tasks can we offload and versus how can we allocate more effectively or optimally? I think these are interesting questions that companies are also grappling with. And I think there's this question of if we're offloading, are we also de-skilling and losing some of our expertise as we do that? And what are some ways in which we may upskill or learn new skills as a result of being able to free up some of this our cognitive resources?
An anonymous attendee asked, "In one of your first examples of AI advantages, you said AI generated the most valuable idea, a plant to convert restaurant waste to useful energy. Did AI do an analysis of profitability?"
Oh, that would be a great next step. We didn't actually do that in this case. I think um, that would be an important evaluation step, which is, how feasible is this? Can it actually generate a profit? What we did instead was have evaluators who knew about the circular economy, who are experienced in it, actually rate these ideas. And so these were prospective evaluations because what came back to us was really ideas as opposed to things that were ideas for how you could create circular economy business ideas.
Awesome. And I'll take this last question. Do you see any new AI technologies, those that might not use so much energy for training or answering questions? Something disruptive in the Christensen framework?
Oh, interesting. There are opportunities in the sense that maybe just to give an example, right now we're using the same models and the same technologies for all sorts of different tasks, but it's not clear that we need these models as opposed to smaller models that are completing specific tasks for us. And so I think if we were, and these smaller technologies could be very good at these specific tasks. And so I think there's a question of whether we could, I think, specialize in the sense of using smaller models for specific tasks as opposed to large models that do many, many different things for us.
Thanks, Jackie. And thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope you'll join us for more signature events soon. Information on upcoming events, as well as recordings of past ones, can be found at vpal.harvard.edu/vpal events.